Hi, I'm Tristan from Get Kraken. Today we're going to discuss how to land an internship in the software development space. Now, this could be for those that are currently in school, studying something in tech, looking to get their first job in the industry, or those that are looking to transition from their current profession or field into the tech space. I've assembled a panel of professionals currently working in the industry that were going to give you their advice on how to interview, what things you can do to stand out, how you can make the most out of your internship that you do land, as well as other best practices and kind of pro tips. This video is part of a larger series titled The First 5 Years in Software Development, produced by Get Kraken, with the hopes to help those that are entering the tech space have a good place to go to navigate those initial years. So, without further ado, let's get on with the panel.
The one that I landed through a family friend, I actually didn't realize that he was a software development manager when I started looking for internships. It was only by starting to talk to people and let them know. So I would tell people start networking, specifically look around for local user groups, or oftentimes universities will have networking opportunities with local industries and companies as other ways to kind of get students involved. Put your name out as far as letting people know that, hey, I'm looking to start gaining some of that experience and see what's around in your local area.
So, in terms of looking for an opportunity, what I would suggest is putting yourself out there. If you can meet people face to face, that's what I would say is the best thing to do. And making a great first impression is always a really good thing. So, like if they come talk to your class, follow them to the coffee shop, or if they're going somewhere after class to actually get to talk to them, I think is the best thing that you can do.
Put something out there and show that you want to do something that you're passionate about. Create your portfolio, but make it public. And while you're at it, um, make something that it's useful for someone and get it loud. Put it on LinkedIn, put it on Twitter, put it on, Reddit, whatever. Reach out to other developers, exchange some ideas, go to Stack Overflow, create a trace that people can follow and can see what you're doing.
I totally agree with what Ricardo was saying. The really important part of that to add on to is make sure you follow up. It doesn't matter how many connections you make if you do not follow up. That was something that really impressed both Kevin and I about Meg was I would say touch base in 3 months and we could put it on our calendar and by Jove, she was going to reach out in 3 months. So every time we asked her to do something, there was follow up.
Just follow up on that. I can tell you that throughout my career, there were a couple of, or more than a couple of jobs that I wouldn't have gotten if I didn't follow up. I wouldn't have been considered. And just because I called and say like, oh, just to check up if, I'm still under consideration or something, they said, oh, what's your name again? Yeah, can you just show up this day or that day? I wouldn't have got the job if I didn't call back. So it's definitely worth. And the know you already have if you don't call. So there's nothing to lose.
For somebody coming into an internship, when they're looking for a company, one of the questions I would tell them to ask is what sort of review is going to be on their work. I've heard of some people in internships where they just kind of get left to their own devices. And like people have said, it's all about the experience and knowledge gain that you can have. So when you are applying for internships, ask the company that question. Hey, what kind of either mentorship or how often are the touch bases are going to be? How often is somebody going to be checking my work? That kind of thing. Because ultimately, being left to your own devices doesn't give you a ton of experience if you aren't getting that feedback from somebody already in the field.
And I think it's also important to know what you don't want to do. And what I say to my kids is, okay, if you don't know what you want to do, at least try to understand as soon as possible what you don't want to do. So if you go to your internship and you are concerned that you might be asked to do the round coffee or whatever, um, at least go with that mindset that it might be a way to understand what you don't want to do and start ticking those boxes.
So for me, it's probably more like an interpersonal skill rather than a technical skill. What we look for when we hire interns is there's kind of a few things, but the assumption is that you're new to the field, like you're still learning, you're fresh out of school kind of thing. And we don't assume that you've got everything figured out just yet because you are still learning. So what we look for in our internship candidates are things like humility, you know, that you don't just have the attitude that you know everything, that you're passionate to both learn and to get better, that you're willing to take ownership and kind of be a self-starter, that you're willing to learn and adapt as you grow in your career. And I think that that's something that you can tend to see early on. And teamwork, because coding is a team sport, and we can't possibly do this by ourselves. Otherwise, it's just really hard to do. So those are some of the things that we look for.
I help grade a class that we teach at a local college. And we've noticed that a lot of students coming out of college just don't have the real world skills that they need. They're not really learning a lot about, usually none of them learn anything about Git, which is really bad. So definitely Git is a big skill that you should have. A lot of them don't really learn like newer languages or web frameworks. So a lot of companies nowadays are probably going to be looking for some kind of web skill or web framework skill, unless you're going to be a purely backend dev. So maybe looking into like Vue, React, Angular, like one of those big three. Lots of companies are going to look for more modern languages. So like Java is a great language, but C#. Or if you wanted to do something like Python, it kind of depends where you want to go with your career. But I think that learning on top of your schoolwork will really help you, because I think your school will teach you the principles and the basics, but you'll have to dive deeper than that to be really successful. When I interview the interns for Intellitech, the biggest thing that will make an intern stand out is their passion. So if you're coming out of school or you're maybe looking for an internship, you're still in school, you're getting your CS degree, there's like 10 other candidates who also have a CS degree. So that's really not that standoutish. It's great that you have one because we know that you kind of know the basics and the principles, but it's not going to make you stand out. Don't expect your degree to be what gets you a job. Doing things like making a portfolio and being passionate about software is what's going to make you stand out. And when I say make a portfolio, put it up on GitHub, put like smaller finished products or smaller finished repositories are a lot better than like one huge unfinished repository. So don't think you need some big fancy thing. Like do small little things like a tic-tac-toe game, for example, or a little console app that like you can write recipes into. Just simple little things, but things that show that you've worked on your own time exploring things that you've learned in your degree.
For me, having a number of projects that can be easily viewable or can download and run straight on GitHub or just some other platform is great. Whether it's a personal project or a team project, it's extremely beneficial to have a portfolio that you can showcase off the things that you've worked on when you're applying to internships or a full-time job, especially if you don't have formal education like through a university, or if you're switching from a different career. But I think an important distinction is be able to explain how your project works. So don't just copy paste code from Stack Overflow to make a project. Make sure that you can explain what the code does and why you chose to do that project.
I'm surprised at how often people don't have something current that they can share. And it's super important, especially when you're starting to ask for, when you become a senior dev and you're asking for those higher wages, to not have something to show someone is really difficult to, for someone to be able to evaluate your skills. So it's important to have.
Some common mistakes that I see just kind of across the board, not even just interns. There's a few things, but here's some of the more common ones. Having things on your resume that you're not actually experienced with. So because you did a tiny project on something, some new language, and then putting that on your resume. Like if you're not able to answer a question about that technology or that language, I would recommend not having it on your resume. You can link it to your portfolio, that's fine, but be willing to answer questions if it's on your resume. So that's the first important thing. The second thing is not being humble, or at least coming off as though you're not humble. I've interviewed a few teams or people that have said, I won this hackathon, or I've won this, or I have all these awards. And while I think that that's great that you've accomplished those things, and I want you to showboat a little bit and tell me about the things that you've done, but I think doing it in a way that doesn't come off as having the people think that are interviewing think that you're too good for them or you don't need them kind of thing is an important thing to do. And then lastly is following up, because myself actually, had I not followed up, I would have not gotten the job that I have. So I think that is kind of a common theme here today.
One of the things that I would add on to that is people actually working in internships. One of the most important things is to think through what you are actually adding to the company, right? The internship is a two-way street. Like, the company wants to invest in people, but ultimately they aren't doing it as a complete charity. Like, there should be a little bit of give and take. Like we said earlier, the interns aren't expected to be performing at like a regular employee's level, but there's a balance when interns get given problems of how long should you spend struggling on your own, when should you ask questions. And oftentimes I see interns really kind of fighting with this. Well, I want to ask questions, but I don't want to just be constantly like nagging and asking questions and that kind of thing. So a lot of it's going to depend upon the team and who you're with, but finding that balance about making sure that you are attempting to solve a problem and really thinking through the questions that you're asking. I usually try to tell them that it's not about the number of questions or how often that you're coming to me with questions, but more about what the questions are that you're asking, right? I want to hear a question that indicates that you've spent some time thinking about the problem. There's a wonderful principle, rubber duck debugging, and students laugh at me, but I will literally bring rubber ducks and say, explain. There you go, Wyatt. I love it. Literally go. I want to know that you've actually explained the problem to a rubber duck and thought through it before you actually come to me. So I guess that would be the one thing I would say is don't worry about as many questions as you ask, but make sure that you're asking good questions.
Firstly, I think it is learning when to ask for help. Understanding when you're struggling and when a good time to ask for help would be is a really important skill. Because you don't want to just sit there and struggle for an entire day, especially if the company's paying you, because they'll be like, why did you waste a day? Lastly would be being able to fail and learn how to fail successfully. I know that kind of sounds like a meme, but the faster that you can learn how to fail, the faster that you can learn from those failures and turn those failures into success later on, because you'll learn how to identify before the failures happen, because you'll say, oh, I made that mistake before, I'm not going to do that again. So you end up becoming self-sufficient and you kickstart your career in a great way.
Keep in mind, you're going to get out of it whatever you put into it. So if you are jumping in, don't just jump in feet first, jump in completely, immerse yourself in the experience, and you'll get more out of it. And that will take you further on in your career as well.
Yeah, and I think like Ricardo was saying a little bit earlier, is just figuring out what you like to do and what you don't like to do. And I think you're saying it's a lot easier to figure out what you don't like to do, because I'll ask interns that I'm mentoring, I'll be like, oh, so what do you really want to do for your career? And they'll say, oh, I want to do AWS, and I want to do DevOps, and I want to write pipelines, and I want to do Python, and I want to do C#, and I want to do front end and back end and React and Vue. And it's like, oh my goodness, like you can't want to do all of that, right? You're going to not like some of it. So they don't really know what they want to do. They want to try everything, which is great. You should try as much as you can in your internship. And then you should really focus on what you like doing and what you don't like doing. Don't get confused. You're still going to have to do the things you don't like to do, but you'll at least know that you don't like to do them so that you can try and push for things that you'd like to do in your career and kind of work towards that.
I'd just add, don't waste a connection. For me, the mentor that I had at my first internship, is also the reason why I have the job that I have today. You never know when you have either a coworker or a colleague. It could be somebody who is working in a completely different department, that, you know, maybe at some point you need them to have that recommendation. Like we said earlier, networking at user groups is great. Making sure people know your name, make sure the people that you work with are going to give you a good report.